Good morning. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'd like to talk about data validation, data entry validation. So basically ensuring what the user puts in is valid, because we all know the general saying, garbage in, garbage out. So if the users are putting in incorrect information, then you can't expect the system to work properly to do other things down the line. Today, I want to focus on one specific element of that, which is data entry of email addresses, and how we can ensure that the email addresses being put into a system are actually valid email addresses. Short of testing them, and I have done that for one charity database where it actually sent out an email, and then we waited for the responses to come into the inbox. And anyway, it's very convoluted and complex, but it can be done. We can at least validate that it follows email syntax rules set out by the RFC guidelines. And we're not going to dive into that. That's very complex. But we're still going to do our best to ensure that we are following those rules and that the data going in is actually potentially possible values, and stop, typos and things like that from occurring. So how do we do it? Well, let's first look at how we currently handle the situation, and then we'll look at how we improve upon it. So for this, to be able to do a little demo here, I'm going to use the application parts, contacts. And this will just, as you can see, create a whole series of tables, queries, forms, reports. Now, for what we're doing today, we don't need the bulk of this, so I'm just going to delete it just to eliminate any confusion. So I'm getting rid of all of this. This is what we're left with, a compact, clean things up. We have a table with a form built on top of it. And in it, as you can see, we can come in, and this is what Microsoft has deemed an acceptable email address format. So as you can see, it's total bogus, like the email address says it is. Type anything, any value will be acceptable according to Microsoft. So this is far from acceptable. You cannot hand this over to users and not expect to get garbage. It's just the reality of the situation. People make mistakes. People aren't always paying attention. People are doing things quickly. You can't allow this in a real production scenario. So we're not going to allow it, and that's what the whole premise of today's video is. So how do we solve this? Well, years ago I wrote this original article here, and I posted a function that I had found online. It's not my creation. I don't know who did it. And basically it steps through doing a whole series of different tests one by one. The length of it. Is there actually an entry? Does it have the @ symbol, etc., etc., etc.? And it does its best in like 6-7 steps to decide if it's a valid email address. I use this. I use it for a couple clients. It works relatively well. It won't catch everything. And that was the problem I encountered, is there are case scenarios where this still didn't catch mistakes. So I wasn't 100% happy with it. And I knew there had to be a better way of going about it. And that's where eventually I came out with using regular expressions, RegEx. And that is the solution. How does RegEx work? If not even necessarily speaking about this exact scenario, just in a general sense, if we're using it for testing, we supply to a function a value or series of values, depends what you're doing, but a value. And we're going to create a RegEx object, define a pattern for that RegEx object, and then we're going to use that pattern to perform a test on the string that we supplied. So it's going to test whatever we supplied against the defined pattern. Now, pattern, what are we talking about pattern? Well, you can have all sorts of patterns. Today, in this video, we're talking about email addresses. So I'm going to use a pattern that follows the general guidelines and the way the syntax is structured for an email address. But you could have a rule if you wanted to test IP addresses, if you wanted to test URLs, if you wanted to test numbers or strings, the whole slew of options available to you, because you can define any pattern you want, because this is it's a language in its own, regex and the patterns. So you can create a pattern that suits any need you need, as long as you know how to write the syntax for it. And there are websites dedicated to it. For instance, I'm just going to mention this one here. I have a link in my article. But as you can see here, this is a website, and it has a section here, Browse Expressions, where people have posted different patterns. And you can come here, captures submatch, domain length, 64 characters. So you read the description, and it tells you what each pattern was for. Most email validations are outdated. Ignore domain names that contain foreign characters. So this one apparently addresses that. So this would be for validating email addresses, for instance. And you can come up here and you can filter. I want one that validates dates and times, let's say. I want one that addresses and phone numbers. So you can go through, find the one that makes you happy. This one here for Quebec postal codes, that would be perfect for me, for instance. And you literally just come here, copy the regex, and then pop it into your VBA and see if that suffices your need. It's always important when you're copying from any source that you test it, right? Don't just assume that because someone put it there and wrote something that it is going to work for your needs. Test it, test it, test it. Okay, back to the matter, validating email addresses. So that's what it is here. It all comes down to the pattern, right? So this is a general pattern that should suffice to test email addresses. I will say, for the completeness and 100% honesty, this probably suffices 99% of email addresses, but there are exceptions where it won't work. Now, someone pointed that out to me a couple years ago. And this guy here, where I had built a tool to extract email addresses from strings. And someone pointed out in the comments that it doesn't catch certain ones and whatnot. Fair enough. And like I said, well, then you can try a different pattern or another one I had come up with. Anyway, and then I also added a link that brings you to this guy here. And this, technically, the pattern that would be required to catch all email addresses if you follow the RFC rules for email addresses. So if you really want to get into being 100% sure of what you're doing, this is the type of pattern you'd have to use. 6,500 characters long. I think it's overkill for most scenarios. For my use cases with my clients, this has been more than sufficient. But the information is on my blog. The links are there should you ever want to. So you just copy paste it, plop it in here, and start doing some testing. But like I say, this guy here works fine in general. I'm probably 99% of the time, so I'm happy with it. How do we put it in place? Well, we just copy the function, come back to VBA. We're going to insert a module, not a class module, a standard module, or if you already have some, you can go put it in an existing one. We put it in there. We always debug to make sure there are no bugs, so that VBA Access is happy with what we just inserted. We're going to save it. In this case, I'll give it a name that makes sense. You can name it however you want. The name makes no difference to it working. So now we have the validation function itself. And if we wanted, we can come and test it out in the immediate window, right? It's valid. If I come here, and let's say we delete the com, it isn't valid. Okay, so you can test it directly in the immediate window before you even get to using it in a form, query, whatever you want. The next step, obviously, is the form itself. Well, if we come back to the article, everything is explained there. You come here, it says, then use the email address before update event to perform the validation. So we'll copy the sample code. We'll come into our form in design view. We will take the control that we want to validate the data from, and we will use the before update event. Why before update? because we want to catch the error before the table gets updated. We don't want bad data to make it to the table in the first place. So we want to catch it before any updates occur. So we're going to come here, Code Builder. We're going to insert it here. Here's my sample code. We're always going to insert our error handler for safe measures. It costs us nothing, but it will save us potentially a lot of pain. And then we have one last thing to do, of course, is debug. Oh, look at that. Because my sample code is just that. It's sample. It's not geared towards the specific database you're putting it in play. So here it says email address control name. We need to put the name of the control we're validating. So I just come back here on my form. I'm still on that control. I will copy the name. We could have used the IntelliSense and VBA. We could have just copied it from here as well. Lots of ways of doing the same thing. Now we can do debug. It's happy. We can save it. We can close our form now. And we can come here. And now if we try to put in bogus information, we get a nice message and it tells us, no, that's not acceptable. You've made a mistake. Click OK. And .com. Nope, that's not good either. Okay. I needed my @ symbol. That's what it was. No, that's not good. Daniel. Now it's happy. That at least is formatted in a manner that's potentially acceptable. Obviously, if people make typos, there's nothing you can do about that. Like I said, the only way to validate that would be to test the emails one by one. And that is a scenario that you can do depending on the type of database you've got. But just this one step alone of ensuring that the basic format is followed will solve a lot of problems. I guarantee you, because I'm telling you this from experience. That's all good and dandy. We've now locked down the form. And we're going to somewhat ensure that the data going in is at a minimal level of quality. But what if, like when my client, I had a client that had a massive mailing system. They originally were a magazine business, and they went into newsletter, shifting as things changed, right? And they had hundreds of thousands of clients and lots of problems with email addresses. Well, luckily for us, the function isn't limited to just working in a form. So if you have existing data, you can just as easily use it in a query. So you can come in and you can come here. And then we could come here and use the zoom and just grab here the name of the function just to have it in memory to simplify things. So we come here and we'll do is valid email. And the function itself, and then the name of the field we want to test. And if we look at our table, it's email address. Okay. And now we can run this, and you'll see -1 means true. It is a valid email. Let's just save this. Validate email addresses. And we can, now the form is going to block me from making bad errors here, so I'm going to do it directly in a table. Johnson, Mary, and just because I like the bogus.com domain, we'll go with bogus.com again. And now if we run the query, you'll see that the first one, yes, it appears to be valid, but the second one does not appear to be valid. So you can easily take this type of query and say, all I want to extract are the 0, the false ones. And now instantaneously, we have a query that will output any entry in our contacts table that has an invalid or appears to be invalid email address. And now the users can go through that reduced list instead of having to go through hundreds of thousands of records. Now they just have to go through hopefully tens or hundreds of records. And they can make the necessary adjustments, call these people to rectify the errors, whatever the case may be. But you're able to use queries now and empower extracting the erroneous data entries that already exist. And that's how easy it is to work with regular expressions to validate what is being input and even test existing data within your database. Before we sign off here, I do want to ask you guys a quick question. I was eagerly awaiting a recent video on YouTube, and it was about using Blazor with Access. Some of you may already be familiar with the video I'm referring to. And I was a little surprised at the end of the day on an Access channel that, because what I knew of Blazor, I'd been following it for quite some time, been on initial PGIs with regards to its development, so I'm well aware of it. And I thought some developers knew stuff that I didn't. And then the video turned out to be not Access in any way. It turned out to be exactly what I thought it would be, is you're going to develop a web app, but you're going to use Blazor to do it. So you're going to have SQL Server, and you're going to have a Blazor framework as a web app, because that's what Blazor is. So it had nothing to do with Access. My question to you as my viewers is, up until now, I've tried to keep my channel somewhat Office or at least Access-centric to a certain extent. And I was just wondering, is that type of content of interest to you? I've spent now several years basically migrating away from Access for various reasons, need, and also, I guess, overall disappointment in the product. And as such, I've done extensive development now in PHP using a framework or two. And that takes us away, just like Blazor does, it takes us away from Access completely. It empowers us in many, many ways, and we can develop now true web applications that run on any platform, Mac, OS, Android. As long as you have a browser, it's going to run. And I was just wondering, is that a value to this group that are currently viewing my videos? Or do you prefer that I really stick with Access or Office, at least, information? Anyway, if you guys wouldn't mind leaving me comments below with regards to that, I'd love to know if me starting to dive into the realm of PHP is of interest to you. Migrating a project, shall we say, like I've done with a couple clients now, where you are able at least to migrate the table and get your data, and then you start building a new framework that you will put on a web server, and now you have a true web application, and basically Access is out of the equation completely. So it's going to the next level, in my opinion. Let me know what you think about that. As always, I would like to say thank you for spending a couple minutes with me today. I hope this has been somewhat informative and helpful to some of you out there, and we will see you in the next video. If you don't mind, like, subscribe, share, and as always, leave me some comments below. It's the best way to enable me to continue to make more videos, if that's the type of thing you'd like to see me do. Take care, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.